Bienvenidos! Today we're going to talk about how to learn Spanish. And one of the things we need to talk about is how difficult it is for most people in the United States to learn another language. In our country, in the United States, for some reason, we don't really emphasize learning a second language until people are much older, usually in high school. And unfortunately, when we do this, we're missing a window of opportunity to teach language skills at a much younger age, which is really the best time. But if you're older and you would like to learn how to speak another language, all is not lost. It's totally possible. I did not learn to speak Spanish until I was 17 years old. I had only had one little high school Spanish class before I actually learned to speak Spanish. So it's completely possible to become fluent in another language at an older age. But what we have to do is understand how language learning takes place in order to be effective language learners. And for some people, this may be more difficult than for other people, but overall, if you know how to speak one language, then you have learned a language, and you are capable of learning a language. Now, the thing that we need to understand is what language really is. So first, I want to show you a couple of pictures and just ask you some questions about them. These are pictures of a mother and daughter, and we have two different mother-daughter pairs here. The mother and daughter on my right are in a classroom, looks like maybe an elementary school classroom, and the mother and daughter on my left are in what looks like a washroom. And I just wanted to ask you if you think that these people have the same thoughts and have the same perspective on the world, maybe speak the same language, dress the same. And I think what you would have to say is, the answer is no. The mother and daughter on my right probably have very different ideas and thoughts and feelings than the mother and daughter on my left. And we have to ask ourselves why. Well, probably the mother and the daughter on my right are from the United States. And I can tell you that the mother and daughter on my left are from Colombia. And the reason that they have different thoughts, maybe different language, is because they come from a different place, a different culture. They've had different experiences. They've seen different things and lived different lives. And what we have to understand is that language is actually a representation of thoughts. It's a representation of ideas, emotions, perspectives on the world, and culture. And so what we have to understand when we're learning another language is that a language is not just words and sounds and definitions of vocabulary, but actually represents different ways of thinking, different ways of looking at the world. And when we learn another language, we're not just going to learn how to speak differently and how to use different words. We're actually going to need to learn how to think about the world in a different way. And I just wanted to show you these two pictures so that you could really see the contrast between the life experiences of people in two different countries. So one of the things that we need to know about language when we're learning another language is that we're also going to learn how to think differently, how to understand different perspectives on existence and on the world. And that's really what culture is as well. People have different emotions, different views on situations. And so when we're learning another language, just be ready to broaden your mind and learn different ways of thinking. So getting back to why is language so difficult to learn? Well, learning another language is something that we did when we were really young. When we were babies, the process actually started. When we were babies, the only ways we had to communicate and that we received communication were by the sense of touch, by the sense of smell, by taste and limited sight, and also, most importantly, listening. When babies are first born, even when they're still in the womb, they can hear sounds in the womb, and I guess by research we know that they can actually kind of identify and respond to their mother's voice. So babies are learning, and they're still not maybe able to communicate very clearly, because crying is probably the main way we know something's wrong. But they learn pretty quickly that if they cry, somebody's going to come and take care of whatever it is, the dirty diaper or the bottle, but something's going to happen if they cry. So when babies are really young, they pretty much identify and communicate with their primary caregiver. But then as they get a little bit older, okay, when babies are a little bit older, not even maybe 1 year old yet, they start trying to manipulate their world. They start trying to use those kinesthetic senses to control their hands and their legs and pointing or reaching towards something. They also have better sight. Their vision improves, and they can see further away. They can identify a larger group of people, and they can probably understand a larger variation in voices, because maybe they can understand siblings and their immediate family in the household where they live, people they see every day, caregivers that they would see every day. And they begin to associate their actions with responses from the community around them. They begin to make a little bit different sounds depending on what their needs are, what their emotions are. Then as they get older, they start actually associating objects with sounds. They start making words, phrases, and imitating people around them, actually trying to repeat the exact sound that they're hearing, because they know that if they can say bottle appropriately, they're going to get their bottle, or they're going to get a cookie, or they're going to get their mommy. So when children are just a little bit older, then they can start imitating sounds. They make that association. And they can understand and be understood by even extended family members and friends or neighbors. Then when children get to be probably school age or even preschool age, sometimes they start reading, writing, making letter sound combinations. They even start learning grammar in school. They have a wider association of people they communicate with, friends, family, plus activities they go to, gymnastics, teachers. So as you can see, all of this is happening, all of this language learning is happening at a very young age. And that's why when we are in high school or college or even older and we try to go back and learn another language, it's hard because we've forgotten the process that we followed to learn language in the first place. And so some of the skills that we used to learn our first language, we need to remember how we did that and go back and employ those same skills in order to be more successful at learning a second language. And that's why learning another language tends to be difficult, because it's like learning that you haven't done in a very long time. It's not like learning for a history class or learning for a science class. It's a different type of learning that involves all of your senses and your emotions and your perspective on the world. It involves a change in view of culture and how people think and how you think. So what we need to do when we're learning Spanish is to remember all of the skills that we used to learn our first language, because these same skills are going to be necessary to learn Spanish. We're going to need to learn to listen very well, and we're going to need to learn to imitate sounds very well. And as you can see, all of these things, all of the language that we knew English before we got to school. So these first three pictures, the infant, the baby, and the toddler, that's actually where real communication, real language learning takes place. By the time we got to school and learned grammar and reading and writing, we already knew English. We already knew how to pronounce it. We knew how to understand spoken English. We knew how to communicate. When we got to school and learned the reading and the writing and the spelling and the grammar, that was just giving us more information about a language that we had already learned to communicate in. So when we're learning Spanish, a lot of the Spanish courses that we take in the United States are focused kind of backwards. We're teaching grammar and spelling and writing and trying to do the pronunciation kind of as an afterthought. But what we really need to do is focus on the basics of pronunciation and comprehension. And just like when we are infants, we need to focus on, at first, just understanding a small circle of people. And a lot of times, the best way to do this is to focus on your teacher, or focus on understanding just the people in your classroom, or even just a small group of people in your class. And once you can do that, all right, then you branch out and have a larger social group of people that you can understand and communicate with. Because we all have our own little idiosyncrasies in how we use language. And if we follow this process of developing our Spanish skills, then eventually we'll get to a point where we can communicate with a wide circle of Spanish speakers, and we'll be able to understand a wider variety of accents. And the other thing that I would point out is, if you're really interested in learning to communicate in Spanish, that the grammar is not necessarily as important as being able to pronounce and have a basic vocabulary of pronunciation that's good. Because we can understand a lot of what young children say before they've learned what nouns and pronouns are and how to conjugate verbs properly. So I would like to encourage you, if you're really interested in learning to communicate in Spanish, to really try to focus on some of these skills in basic verbal communication. And if you can, work in the grammar as well, but save that for your Spanish class and for taking tests in Spanish class, and really concentrate on real communication, conveying your thoughts, your emotions, and your ideas, and understanding what thoughts, emotions, and ideas are going on in the Spanish people who are trying to communicate with you.